Join Samantha and Hans at the next Macro to Micro Options Power Hour, held each Wednesday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. Registration is free. Scan this QR code or click on the link in the description.
No Powell capitulation. So let's talk about Nvidia and Powell today, since they were the highlights. And since really we have been tight as it relates to the range Monday, Tuesday, right? We're kind of waiting for something totally wicked awesome to happen or fall apart. And BlackRock coming out and saying we're in recession now is going to make the airwaves and make even more dangerous sinking sand. But Powell had a chance to come out and say, yep, you know what, we're thinking about it, but he didn't. So there is a duty. I know he's trying to fight for independence. I know he basically is worried now. Now he's worried about stagflation. He's worried about rising prices, not being so transitory, although he says it's one and done. Not so, not so. And slowing economic growth. So he admitted to both of those today. So he didn't help the market's sense of confidence. And then he doubled down and said, money will find that this is a difficult jurisdiction. He used the word jurisdiction, which is basically it's harder to be safe investing in the US. So he basically confirmed and pushed back against Trump. And that's going to create some friction. We already know that Trump is trying to kind of navigate ways to remove him. Basent has also confirmed and coordinated on that messaging. And Trump doesn't seem like he is the type of guy that's going to come back and say, I was just kidding. All tariffs are done. We've gotten what we want out of this. They have one thing that I thought was more planned and coordinated early on is now removed. So in other words, even whatever little confidence I had in this plan around tariffs as a way to negotiate to get their tax cuts and debt ceiling raised is now off the table because of how the bond market reacted. That was outsized. And now the credit market is pretty much frozen. Like they're not doing any deals. They're waiting to see what's going to happen. CLOs are frozen. This is not the loan market is frozen. So we really do have a lot of folks that are just waiting to see what happens next. And I think you can see it in the equity market. It's just not moving until we get an announcement like Nvidia, but that was already priced in. I did a write-up on that already. Continue. You were going to say something before I get onto the Nvidia front.
Yeah, with the restriction on Nvidia to Trump as much as some of the others, but that whole area is just a little bit of a train wreck. But some of the things, as we've been saying, I think this has been a little bit of a gift. So I wanted to show people, just to give them a little something to think about, is some of the things that I've been doing is I've been doing lots of sort of callers. I've been doing some put spreads as well, a little bit of VIX, but VIX has been it hasn't been tricky. I think some of those spreads are cheap. I think you can go in and buy like a, May 31, 32, 45, 50 kind of spread. And I think they're very, very cheap if you get the move out of VIX that you expect. But they are cheap. Or a couple bucks, you can buy $15, $20 of upside. So I think those are interesting too. But I think another way that you can approach things is you could sort of say, well...
By the way, VIX stopped exactly on that 29.56. Do you remember we talked about that last week? So we talked about how that realized volatility typically goes down. And so VIX doesn't necessarily get crushed, but it definitely softens and comes down into VIX expiration, which was today. And this worked perfectly for March, right? We had the same exact MO. And then it helps the equities get stable. And literally that 29.56 that we talked about last Wednesday, it tagged yesterday, stopped on a dime, and turned up a little bit today. So
yeah, that was the spot. You're right. Those the double top there, and yeah, pretty amazing. And I know some people say you can't chart the VIX. I disagree. Yeah, so that was an interesting spot there. And then the VVIX, of course, which had gone bananas. One of the biggest moves we've seen on the VVIX versus the VIX or versus the S&P downside that we've seen in many, many, many years. Really some extreme moves out there related to all the issues that we're talking about and stuff happening behind the scenes. But so I think the VIX it's still a very interesting place. The curve, if you look at the futures curve, we've got VIX above it. It's backwardated. It's not in a happy state. So structurally, I had a few members ask me about SVXY and SVIX, and I said, maybe, that was a few days ago. I said, maybe you can kind of squeeze a little bit out to the upside, but I said structurally, these things are not set up to do very well. And I'm talking about the short VIX products, right? I think you've kind of exhausted some of the benefit, which was the Vega benefit. That is the curve moving down, basically. You make money there. But in terms of the way you typically make money in an SVIX or an SVXY is when you have that beautiful contango and you've got structurally things are sort of made so that that roll yield is essentially kind of rolling the long vol products to oblivion, which benefits SVIX. So we're not in that situation, right? So I'm not a huge fan of being long those products right now, except very, very tactically and in places here or there. But one of the things I've been talking about is, so I had this one portfolio and it's a bunch of leaps and it's a couple $100,000. And I said, one of the ways is you can kind of take a SPY. And what I like about the SPY is you really get kind of when you buy protection in the SPY or the QQQ, you really get that sort of very pinpointed level below which you are protected, right? And we talked about this last week, how well VIX can do this and that, and it's sentiment and it's about mean reversion. And it's a different kind of animal that it is very related to the S&P clearly, but it doesn't always do the things that you necessarily expect them to. But if I own a 5100 put, I know exactly where my protection kicks in. It's at 5100. And so what you can do is you can take your portfolio and you can beta weight it. You can say, well, give me an idea of how my portfolio looks versus, let's say it's really tech weighted. Maybe you'd do this in QQQ. You'd say, well, that's more appropriate in Qs. What's my beta to the Qs? What's my beta to the S&P? And if it tells you, okay, you're a 0.9 beta, you might as well go all the way up. You're basically, because in a sell-off, everything kind of correlates to one. So you don't always get that perfect beta if you're sort of only looking at kind of normal time. In a sell-off, as we talked about earlier, you get everything kind of selling off fairly aggressively. But what you can do is you can beta weight and give yourself a good idea. Oh, okay, well, my portfolio moves at 90% of the S&P, or it moves at 110%. And with that, you can kind of model, well, what does my portfolio look like? So I looked at it and I said, well, it's this particular account is like, and I've used other hedges with this account. So I've been hedging with VIX and QQQ downside, but this time I said, for fun, why don't we just sort of beta weight it and see what it looks like? Well, it kind of looks like 400 SPY. And so then now that I know how this thing looks and how it's going to, there's no guarantees that it's going to move exactly. It's not perfectly fungible with the SPY, but I have an idea of how correlation may translate into a position in SPY. And so what I did is I went and I said, okay, I think this market's a little bit crazy up around 550, to be perfectly honest. And my approach with callers is sometimes I go with a 3-month caller that you can roll as you get very near that 3-month. But the problem with that is you start to lose some of your kind of reactivity as you get too close. So what I often like to do is a 6-month, 3-month, which means you get that 6-month position on, meaning you go out to September, October, whatever might be listed, and then you roll after 3 months. And so the benefit of that is if you keep rolling and giving yourself 3 to 6 months between expiry and roll, then you always have a decent amount of reactivity. Right? If I have a put that's expiring next week and it's 500 points out of the money, it's not going to do anything if the market goes down 100 tomorrow, right? It's not going to be reactive at all. So if I have a little bit of a longer expiry, now I'm getting some reactivity out of most of the moves that I'm going to see. And that's what I want. I want Vega. I want the reactive. I want a position that's going to react to the market doing things. Ignore it. So I went out to September and I said, well, I think we're kind of a little bit nuts up here. And I'm perfectly happy, have an upside problem at 575. So I went and I sold the 575 calls, and I can't remember what I got. The market was higher. I think I got around $14 or something for them. And I used that to buy a very wide downside put spread. So basically like a JPM caller kind of thing, right? You go in, you buy the 510. I think it was the 515 that I bought, and I sold a 420 it was a 410, 515, 410. So I get this massive, massive put spread it was around a $4 debit. So I did pay a little. Sometimes people will do these and look for even money so they don't have to pay anything. But I wanted a little bit of extra sort of oomph to the downside. And that's pretty simple. And then so if the market does take off, this September is a long ways away. So there's no question about it. I mean, this market could be up. We get something positive out of this market, we could go up. So you have to be willing to manage this position, perhaps roll it up. But the assumption is that if the market goes to 575 or 600, your underlying portfolio is going to also do very well. So there's going to be that, give and take there. You're going to do much better in your portfolio than you're giving back in this position. But that's a nice way to kind of finance downside when option prices are very high, as they clearly are.
Join Samantha and Hans at the next Macro to Micro Options Power Hour, held each Wednesday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. Registration is free. Scan this QR code or click on the link in the description. Watch the full Options Macro to Micro Power Hour episode by clicking on the video here and subscribe to LaDucTrading YouTube channel for more content.